How is it that different Christians can appeal to the same Jesus Christ as the source for Christian faith and life, and yet disagree so profoundly about what Christian faith and life are all about? It doesn't take a rocket scientist, or in this case, a theologian, to recognize that different Christians and Christian groups understand the Christian faith differently. If we can get out of our "we're right and they're wrong" mentality for just a moment and look around us, it is abundantly clear that we Christians see everything about the faith very differently. And this begins with how we understand Jesus Christ. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas. And this is your daily devotional for Friday, August 15th, 2025. Ask any group of believers who Jesus Christ is, and you'll get a variety of answers. Most of those answers fall into predictable categories, and most of them are completely in sync with one another. This phenomenon is actually illustrated nicely in the Gospels from the story of Jesus asking the disciples who people say he is. Mark's version of the story reads, "Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, 'Who do people say that I am?' And they answered him, 'John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets.' He asked them, 'But who do you say that I am?' Peter answered him, 'You are the Messiah.' And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him." We usually read this as a story that confronts us directly with the need to decide for ourselves whether Jesus is a philosopher or a prophet or a healer, or whether he is the Son of God. But it also points to the fact that even in his own day, people saw him differently. H. Richard Niebuhr, whose book Christ and Culture we've been exploring, employs what I think is a helpful metaphor here. He talks about portraits of Jesus. Not literal visual representations of Jesus, pictures to hang on the wall, but different understandings of who Jesus is. One of his central claims in this book revolves around who Jesus is, or at least who people think Jesus is. He begins with the simple observation that I repeated above, namely, that different Christian groups pictured Jesus differently. In the days ahead, we'll see the different ways that different groups picture Jesus and how those portraits ultimately lead them to understand Christian faith in some dramatically different ways. For now, it is only important to know that, for Niebuhr, it is plainly obvious that different groups do portray Jesus differently. But just because different people portray Jesus differently does not mean they're wrong. Only that each portrait is partial and incomplete. For Niebuhr understands very well that behind these different portraits there is an original portrait, the real Jesus, if you will. Or more precisely, there are several original portraits. Each of the gospel writers, for example, portrays Jesus a little differently. And these portraits differ from Paul's portrait. And all of these portraits differ from the portraits we find in other letters in the New Testament. The portrait of Jesus in the letters of John is different from the portraits in the letters of Peter and the letters of James, to say nothing of the revelation of John. Together, these are the original portraits. And as the church looks back to them, different groups emphasize different aspects of this one Jesus. But all of the portraits, though partial and incomplete, are still recognizably the same Jesus. Niebuhr writes, "There always remain the original portraits with which all later pictures may be compared, and by which all caricatures may be corrected. And in these original portraits he is recognized as one and the same. Whatever roles he plays in the variety of Christian experience, it is the same Christ who exercises these various offices." So far, so good then. But here's the deal. First, as Niebuhr reminds us, no one's understanding of Jesus Christ is complete. Think of them as portraits taken from different angles and painted with different media and with different colors. They all resemble the original portraits, but none of them are exact copies. There is always some interpretation of Jesus by those who paint the copies, and there is always some interpretation on the part of every Christian group. Second, and to complicate the matter, people simply assume that everyone else shares their understanding of who Jesus is. That's normal, even natural. When we say the name Jesus Christ, we have a definite idea in our mind what we mean, and we assume everyone else does too. Most people don't recognize that their understandings of Jesus are incomplete or different from the way other people understand him. Our natural reaction to people who see things differently is to assume that our understanding is the correct one and the other person's is incorrect. Niebuhr's genius was that he not only observed that people do have different understandings of Jesus, he was able to describe the different portraits different groups have had. And that's where we'll go tomorrow. We'll take a quick look at some of the different portraits of Jesus. You'll easily recognize them, and you'll likely gravitate to at least one of them, but you'll recognize that they're different. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.